Your dead father left you nothing, you worthless little brat, Victoria hissed at 7-year-old Lily. That's when Uncle Marcus stepped into the mansion and heard every word. The storm outside rattled the windows of the Thompson mansion, its Gothic architecture looming against the darkening Los Angeles sky like something from a nightmare. Inside, the crystal chandelier cast eerie shadows across the marble floor where Lily knelt with a worn scrub brush in her bleeding hands. The mansion that had once been filled with laughter and warmth during her father's lifetime now felt like a tomb, cold, silent, and suffocating. Her once beautiful pink dress, the last gift from her father before he died 6 months ago, was now torn and stained with dirty water. The delicate fabric that had once made her feel like a princess was now nothing more than rags clinging to her thin frame. Above her stood Victoria Thompson, 32 years old, draped in a designer red dress that had once belonged to Lily's real mother, Sarah. The red dress was particularly cruel. Sarah had worn it to her last Christmas party before the cancer took her. David had kept it in the closet like a shrine, unable to part with anything that reminded him of his beloved first wife. Now Victoria paraded around in it like she was claiming territory, making it clear that she owned everything that had once belonged to the Thompson family. Victoria's perfectly manicured nails dug into her hips as she towered over the child. The woman who had once presented herself as a loving stepmother now stood like a tyrant surveying her domain. Her platinum blonde hair was styled in perfect waves that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month, and her makeup was flawless despite it being nearly 9 o'clock at night. I said, scrub harder. This floor better shine like a mirror, or you'll be sleeping in the garage again tonight, Victoria commanded, her voice echoing off the high ceilings of the foyer. The garage had become Lily's punishment room over the past few months. It was dark, cold, and smelled of motor oil and gasoline. Victoria had thrown a thin mattress on the concrete floor and called it adequate. When Lily had cried the first night about being scared, Victoria had laughed and told her that unwanted children didn't get to be picky about their accommodations. Lily's small shoulders trembled as she pressed the brush against the marble, her tears mixing with the soapy water. Her knees were raw from kneeling on the hard floor for hours, and her back ached from hunching over. Please, Victoria. Mommy. My hands hurt so much. Can I just rest for a minute? Victoria's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Rest? You think you deserve rest? Your father may have been foolish enough to marry me and bring you into this house, but is gone now. And I'm the one who decides what happens here. The house itself seemed to reflect the change in its atmosphere. Where once fresh flowers had adorned every room, now there was only the sterile scent of cleaning products. The family photos that had lined the hallways, pictures of David and Lily at Christmas, at birthday parties, on vacation, had all been removed and stored in the basement. In their place hung expensive abstract art that Victoria had purchased with David's money, cold and emotionless pieces that made the house feel like a museum rather than a home. The little girl looked up with desperate hope in her brown eyes, David's eyes, inherited from the Thompson side of the family. They were the same warm brown that had made David such a beloved professor at UCLA, eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Now those eyes were dull with exhaustion and fear. But Daddy said this was my home too. He said I would always have a place here, that this house would be mine someday because it was Mommy Sarah's house first. The mention of Sarah made Victoria's face contort with rage. Sarah Thompson had been everything Victoria was not, genuinely kind, naturally beautiful without enhancement, beloved by everyone who met her. Even in death, Sarah's memory haunted Victoria because David had never stopped loving his first wife. Your daddy was a pathetic man who died and left me with his burden, Victoria snapped, her voice echoing through the grand foyer like a whip crack. The only reason you're still here is because I haven't decided what to do with you yet. But don't think for 1 second that you have any rights in this house. What Lily didn't know was that Victoria had already made plans for her. There was a state-run group home in Riverside where unwanted children were dumped. Victoria had visited it twice, spoken with the administrators, and learned that once a child was placed there, family rarely visited. It would be the perfect way to get rid of Lily permanently while maintaining the pretense of being unable to care for her. Marcus Thompson, 45, had just returned from a grueling business trip to Tokyo that had stretched into 3 weeks. His tech company, Marcus Tech Solutions, had just closed a deal worth hundreds of millions with a Japanese consortium, but success felt hollow these days. The corporate jet that had once excited him now felt like a prison, carrying him from one empty hotel room to another, one boardroom to the next. Ever since his brother David had died suddenly of a heart attack 6 months ago, Marcus had thrown himself even deeper into work, trying to escape the guilt that gnawed at him daily like a cancer. The guilt wasn't just about their estrangement. It was about the last words they'd spoken to each other, harsh accusations hurled across a conference table during a failed business negotiation that had ended their relationship forever. He and David had been estranged for years over a business disagreement that now seemed petty and meaningless. Marcus had built his empire while David chose the quieter life of teaching literature at UCLA, and Marcus had never understood his brother's choice. He'd seen it as settling, as wasting the Thompson family's entrepreneurial gifts. Their last conversation had been an argument over Marcus not attending David's wedding to Victoria, with David accusing Marcus of being too proud and Marcus accusing David of being naive about his new wife's motives. Now David was gone, and Marcus would never get the chance to take back those words, to apologize, to tell his brother that he'd been wrong about so many things. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd spent the last 6 months building his business empire even larger, as if acquiring more companies and making more money could somehow fill the David-shaped hole in his life. His assistant had tried to get him to take time off, to grieve properly, but Marcus couldn't sit still. The silence of his Malibu mansion only amplified his regrets. The Uber dropped Marcus at the iron gates of his brother's mansion in Beverly Hills, the same gates he'd driven past countless times over the years without stopping. He still had the spare key David had given him years ago, back when they were still speaking, back when David had hoped that someday Marcus would come around and meet his new family properly. The house was dark except for a few lights in the main foyer, and Marcus noticed that the gardens were overgrown and unkempt. David had always been meticulous about the landscaping. It had been one of his few indulgences, creating a beautiful outdoor space where he could read and grade papers. Now the roses were dead, the hedges were wild, and weeds choked the flower beds. As Marcus approached the front door, he heard voices inside. He paused, his hand on the doorknob, listening to what sounded like a woman's voice raised in anger. There was something in the tone that made his businessman's instincts flare, the same predatory quality he'd heard in hostile takeover meetings, the voice of someone who enjoyed having power over the powerless. Worthless little parasite. If you think crying will get you anywhere, you're more stupid than I thought. Your father spoiled you, but those days are over. Marcus frowned and quietly turned the key. The massive wooden door swung open silently on well-oiled hinges, and he stepped into the foyer that had once welcomed him as a boy when he and David would visit their grandparents who'd built this house. The scene that greeted him made his blood run cold and brought back memories of his own childhood, of times when he'd been the one who needed protection. His 7-year-old niece, David's daughter from his first marriage to Sarah, was on her hands and knees on the marble floor. Her small hands were red and raw, clutching a scrub brush like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to the world. Her dress was filthy, her blonde hair matted and unwashed, hanging in her face like a curtain she was trying to hide behind. She looked like she'd lost at least 10 pounds since the funeral, her face gaunt and her arms thin as twigs. Marcus remembered Lily from before David's death, a bright, bubbly child who'd inherited her father's love of books and her late mother Sarah's gentle spirit. She'd been plump and rosy-cheeked, always laughing, always asking questions about everything around her. The child kneeling on the floor bore little resemblance to the Lily he remembered. Standing over her was Victoria, the woman David had married 2 years ago after a whirlwind romance that had surprised everyone who knew him. She wore an expensive red dress that Marcus recognized. It had belonged to Sarah, David's first wife, and Marcus felt sick seeing it on Victoria's body. She also wore diamond earrings that caught the light as she gestured angrily at the cowering child, earrings that had been Sarah's engagement gift from David. "Your dead father left you nothing, you worthless little brat," Victoria was saying, her voice dripping with venom that seemed to poison the very air around her. "I am the widow. I am the one who inherited everything. You are nothing but—" That's when Marcus stepped fully into the foyer, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble in a rhythm that seemed to echo like gunshots. The sound cut through Victoria's tirade like a blade. Victoria spun around, her face going pale as she saw him, the color draining from her cheeks as if someone had pulled a plug. In an instant, her expression shifted from cruel to sweetly surprised, the transformation so quick and complete that Marcus realized he was looking at a master manipulator. Marcus! Oh my goodness, what a wonderful surprise. She smoothed her dress and put on a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I had no idea you were coming by. Lily and I were just doing some cleaning together, weren't we, sweetheart?" The endearment sounded obscene coming from her lips, especially when Marcus could still hear the echo of her calling the child a worthless brat. Lily looked up at her uncle with wide, frightened eyes that reminded Marcus painfully of David. Marcus hadn't seen her since the funeral 6 months ago, when she'd been a healthy, rosy-cheeked child who'd clung to his hand during the service and asked him in a whisper if Daddy was really never coming home. He'd promised her then that everything would be okay, that Victoria would take good care of her. Looking at her now, Marcus realized how wrong he'd been. The child had aged years and months. Her eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd learned not to hope for kindness, not to expect comfort. It was a look Marcus recognized from his own mirror during the darkest periods of his childhood, when their father had been drinking heavily and their mother had retreated into her own world of denial and prescription medications. Marcus's jaw tightened as he took in the scene. The bucket of dirty water, the child's bleeding hands, the obvious fear in her posture, the way she immediately cowered when Victoria's voice rose, it all painted a picture that made Marcus's businessman instinct scream danger. But there was something else that caught his attention. The house itself felt wrong. Gone were the warm touches that had made this place a home during David and Sarah's time. The fresh flowers that Sarah had always kept in every room, the family photos that had lined the hallways, the children's artwork that Lily had created and that David had proudly displayed on the refrigerator, all of it was gone. In their place was expensive but soulless decor that looked like it had been lifted from a luxury hotel catalogue. The walls were bare except for abstract art that meant nothing to anyone, cold geometric shapes in expensive frames. Even the furniture had been changed. David's comfortable reading chair was gone, replaced by a sterile white settee that looked like it had never been sat on. "Victoria," Marcus said slowly, his voice controlled but dangerous in the way that had made rival CEOs nervous in boardroom negotiations. "What exactly is going on here?" Victoria's laugh tinkled like breaking glass, a sound that raised the hair on the back of Marcus's neck. "Oh, you know how children can be. Lily spilled some juice earlier, and I was teaching her to clean up after herself. Responsibility is so important at her age, don't you think?" Marcus's eyes swept the spotless foyer. There was no evidence of any spilled juice, no sticky residue, no glasses or containers that might have held liquid. The floor was immaculate except for the area where Lily was scrubbing, an area that was already clean. More concerning was the way Lily flinched every time Victoria spoke, the way her small body seemed to fold in on itself as if expecting a blow. Marcus had seen that posture before, in his own reflection as a child, and the recognition made something cold and deadly settle in his chest. Marcus knelt down beside his niece, his heart breaking at how she flinched away from him, her small body going rigid with terror at his approach. "Hello, Lily," he said gently, using the same soft tone he'd once used to calm panicked investors during market crashes. "Do you remember me? I'm your Uncle Marcus." Lily nodded slowly, her small voice barely a whisper, as if she'd learned that speaking too loudly brought punishment. "Daddy showed me pictures. You build computers and live in a big house by the ocean." "That's right." Marcus carefully took the scrub brush from her bloody hands, noting the way she immediately tried to curl her fingers to hide the wounds. "These look pretty sore. When did you last eat something?" The question was prompted by more than concern about the immediate moment. Marcus could see the sharp angles of Lily's collarbones through her thin dress, could count the ribs visible beneath the worn fabric. Her cheeks were hollow, her eyes sunken in a way that spoke of chronic hunger rather than occasional missed meals. Before Lily could answer, Victoria interrupted with forced cheerfulness that sounded like nails on a chalkboard. "She had dinner earlier. Children can be such drama queens, can't they? Always claiming they're hungry or tired or hurt when they want attention. But I've been taking such good care of her since David." She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, putting on a show of grief that would have been Oscar-worthy if Marcus hadn't just heard her true feelings about his brother. Marcus studied Victoria more carefully, his entrepreneur's eye cataloguing details that didn't add up. Her dress was designer. He recognized the cut from having seen it in the fashion magazines his assistant sometimes left on his desk. Her jewelry was expensive, her manicure fresh, her hair clearly styled by a professional colorist. She was living a life of luxury while the child she was supposed to be caring for looked like a Victorian street orphan. Moreover, there was something predatory in the way Victoria watched Lily, like a cat that had cornered a mouse and was deciding whether to play with it some more or deliver the killing blow. Marcus had seen that same look in hostile business negotiations, in the eyes of people who enjoyed having power over others. Marcus stood up slowly, his businessman's instinct screaming that something was very wrong here. Victoria was performing, he realized. Every gesture, every word was calculated to present a certain image, the grieving widow doing her best to care for her difficult stepdaughter. But the performance was slipping around the edges, revealing glimpses of something much darker underneath. "I see," he said carefully, his voice giving nothing away. "Well, I was hoping to take Lily out for dinner, if that's all right with you." The request was a test, and Victoria failed it spectacularly. For just a moment, her mask slipped completely, and Marcus saw panic flash across her features. It was the look of someone whose careful plans were being threatened, someone who couldn't afford to have their victim speak freely to the outside world. Victoria's smile never wavered, but Marcus caught the flash of panic in her eyes, the way her perfectly manicured hand gripped her tissue just a little too tightly. "Oh, that's so sweet of you to offer, but Lily has a bedtime routine we really should stick to. Children need consistency, you know, especially after losing a parent. Perhaps another time." "Actually," Marcus interrupted, his voice firm in the way that had closed $100 million deals, "I insist. Lily, would you like to go get some ice cream?" The little girl's face lit up for the first time since he'd arrived, a glimpse of the bright child she'd once been shining through the mask of fear and exhaustion. "Really? Can I, Victoria? Please?" The eagerness in her voice, the desperate hope for even this small kindness, confirmed Marcus's worst suspicions. This wasn't a child who was occasionally disciplined. This was a child who was being systematically broken down, isolated, and abused. Victoria's grip tightened on her tissue, and Marcus noticed her knuckles going white. "Well, I suppose. But just for a little while. She needs to be back soon. School tomorrow, you know." It was another lie. Marcus knew that the local schools had been on spring break for the past week. He'd seen the announcements in the business journals that tracked demographic trends affecting the tech workforce. If Lily were in school, she'd have no classes tomorrow. "Of course," Marcus said smoothly, his tone giving no hint of his growing anger. "Lily, why don't you go wash your hands and we'll head out?" As Lily scampered toward the bathroom, Marcus turned back to Victoria. Up close, he could see that she was wearing his late sister-in-law's jewelry, Sarah's diamond necklace, her pearl earrings. Sarah had died of cancer when Lily was 4, and David had treasured those pieces as Lily's inheritance. "Beautiful necklace," Marcus commented casually. Victoria's hand flew to her throat. "Oh, this? David gave it to me before he died. Said I should have something to remember Sarah by." Marcus nodded, but made a mental note. David would never have given away Sarah's jewelry. Those pieces were meant for Lily. Lily returned with clean hands, her face still gaunt but hopeful. Marcus helped her into his Tesla, noting how she carefully buckled her seatbelt with practiced efficiency, like someone who'd learned to take care of herself. "Where would you like to go?" he asked as they pulled out of the driveway. "Anywhere that's not there," Lily said quietly, then looked scared that she'd spoken out of turn. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. "How about we get some real food first? When did you last have a proper meal?" Lily considered this seriously. "Victoria gave me toast this morning, and yesterday I found some crackers in the kitchen." "That's all?" Lily nodded. "Victoria says I eat too much and cost too much money. She says Daddy didn't leave any money for taking care of me." Marcus pulled into the parking lot of a family restaurant and sat for a moment, processing what he'd just heard. His brother had been a successful professor with a substantial life insurance policy, plus the house and investments. There was no way David hadn't left provisions for his daughter. Over dinner, Marcus watched Lily eat with the desperate hunger of someone who'd been starving. She devoured a cheeseburger, fries, and a milkshake with mechanical efficiency, as if afraid the food might be taken away. "Lily," he said gently, "can you tell me what your days are like at home?" The little girl looked around nervously, as if Victoria might be listening. "I'm not supposed to tell anyone about house stuff. Victoria says it's family business." "But I'm family too, remember? I was your daddy's brother." Lily considered this, then nodded slowly. "I wake up really early and clean the kitchen. Then I do laundry and mop the floors. Victoria checks everything, and if it's not perfect, I have to do it again." Marcus kept his expression calm, but inside he was seething. "What about school? Are you going to school?" "Victoria says I'm homeschooled now, but we don't really do lessons. She says cleaning is more important than reading." "Do you like reading?" Lily's whole face brightened. "I love it. Daddy used to read to me every night. We were in the middle of Charlotte's Web when he..." Her voice trailed off. Marcus reached across the table and gently took her small hand. "Would you like me to read with you sometime?" Lily nodded eagerly, then her face fell. "But Victoria doesn't like it when I read." She says books are a waste of time and I should be working. As they finished dinner, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Where are you? It's past Lily's bedtime. Please bring her home immediately. Another buzz. I'm getting worried. Please respond. And another. Marcus, I really think you should bring her back now. Marcus showed Lily the messages. It looks like Victoria wants you to come home. Lily's face crumpled with disappointment and fear. Do I have to go back tonight? Can't I stay with you? The desperate hope in her voice nearly broke Marcus's heart. Not tonight, sweetheart. But I promise you, this isn't over. I'm going to make sure you're safe. As they drove back to the mansion, Marcus's mind was racing. He needed proof of what was happening to Lily, and he needed legal advice. But first, he needed to get the child through one more night. When they pulled up to the house, Victoria was waiting on the front steps, her arms crossed and her face tight with barely controlled anger. There you are, she called out with forced brightness. I was starting to worry. Marcus walked Lily to the door, noting how the little girl seemed to shrink in on herself as they approached Victoria. Thank you so much for dinner, Uncle Marcus, Lily said politely, but her eyes were pleading with him not to leave her. You're very welcome, Marcus replied. He looked directly at Victoria. I'd like to take Lily out again soon. Maybe this weekend. Victoria's smile was sharp. We'll see. Lily has a lot of responsibilities here. As Marcus drove away, he looked back in his rearview mirror to see Victoria's hand clamped firmly on Lily's shoulder, steering her into the house. The door closed behind them with finality. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Lily's hollow cheeks, her bleeding hands, the fear in her eyes. He thought about his brother David, how he'd always been the gentler one, the one who believed in the goodness of people. David had trusted Victoria completely. At 3 a.m., Marcus finally gave up on sleep and opened his laptop. He started researching family law, child custody, and estate planning. What he found made his blood run cold. According to California law, if David had died without a proper will, everything would have gone to Victoria as his surviving spouse. Lily, as his daughter from a previous marriage, would only have inheritance rights if specifically provided for. Marcus pulled up David's contact information and found his brother's lawyer, Harold Kendrick. At 6 a.m. sharp, Marcus was calling Harold's emergency line. Harold, this is Marcus Thompson. I need to know about my brother's will immediately. Harold's voice was groggy but concerned. Marcus, is everything all right? No, everything is not all right. What provisions did David make for Lily in his will? There was a long pause. Marcus, I'm sorry to tell you this, but David never completed his will. He came to me about 6 months before he died, said he wanted to update everything now that he was remarried. But he kept putting off the final signing. When he died, he was technically intestate. Marcus felt sick. What does that mean for Lily? Under California law, Victoria inherited everything as his surviving spouse. Lily has no legal claim to anything unless she can prove David intended otherwise. But surely David had life insurance? A trust? The life insurance had Victoria as the sole beneficiary. David had mentioned wanting to set up a trust for Lily, but again, he never followed through. I tried calling him several times to finish the paperwork, but he said he was busy with wedding preparations and would get to it later. Marcus closed his eyes, realizing the full scope of what Victoria had done. She'd married David, convinced him to make her his beneficiary, and then, what? Had David's heart attack really been natural? Harold, I need you to meet me at your office in 2 hours. I think my niece is in serious danger. When Marcus arrived at Harold's downtown office, he brought photos he'd taken discreetly on his phone the night before, pictures of Lily's hands, her thin frame, the fear in her eyes. Harold studied the images with growing concern. This looks like neglect, possibly abuse. But, Marcus, even if we can prove Victoria is mistreating Lily, the child has no legal claim to David's estate. There has to be something we can do. Harold was quiet for a long moment, thinking, there might be. If we can prove that Victoria obtained her inheritance through fraud or that she's unfit to have custody of a child, we might be able to challenge the estate distribution. But we'd need solid evidence. What kind of evidence? Proof that she's abusing or neglecting Lily. Documentation of the child's condition. Medical records would be helpful. And if we could show that Victoria somehow influenced David's death or prevented him from completing his will. Marcus leaned forward. You think she might have killed him? I'm not saying that. But the timing is suspicious. David was healthy. He was planning to update his will to provide for Lily, and then he suddenly dies of a heart attack before signing anything. That afternoon, Marcus drove back to the mansion, this time with a plan. He'd researched private investigators and hired the best firm in LA. He'd also contacted a child psychologist who specialized in abuse cases and made an appointment with Child Protective Services. But first, he needed to document everything. When he arrived at the house, Victoria answered the door with that same fake smile. Marcus, 2 visits in 2 days. We are so lucky. I brought Lily some books, Marcus said, holding up a bag from Barnes & Noble. David always said she loved to read. Victoria's smile tightened. How thoughtful. But as I mentioned yesterday, Lily doesn't really have time for reading. She's learning important life skills. Such as cleaning, cooking, laundry, things that will serve her well in life. Marcus pushed past Victoria into the foyer. Lily, are you here? The little girl appeared at the top of the staircase, moving slowly as if every step hurt. She was wearing the same dirty dress from the day before. Uncle Marcus, she called out, then caught herself and looked nervously at Victoria. It's all right, Marcus said. I brought you some presents. Lily's eyes lit up as Marcus pulled out book after book. Charlotte's Web, Matilda, The Secret Garden, Harry Potter. These are for me, she whispered in amazement. All yours, Marcus confirmed. Would you like me to read one with you? Victoria stepped between them. That's very generous, Marcus, but Lily has chores to finish. Perhaps you could visit another time when she's not so busy. Marcus looked around the spotless foyer, noting that everything was already perfectly clean. What chores does a 7-year-old need to do that can't wait an hour? She needs to prepare dinner, Victoria said smoothly. She's 7 years old. Children need to learn responsibility. Marcus felt his temper rising but forced himself to stay calm. I'd like to see Lily's room. Victoria's face went white. I'm sorry, that's not. I mean, it's quite messy up there. But Marcus was already climbing the stairs, following Lily. The little girl led him down a hallway past several closed doors to a small room at the end. When Marcus saw Lily's bedroom, his hands clenched into fists. It wasn't a bedroom at all. It was a converted storage closet. A thin mattress lay on the floor with a single threadbare blanket. There was no dresser, no toys, no personal belongings except for one framed photo of David and Lily together. This is where you sleep? Marcus asked quietly. Lily nodded, not meeting his eyes. Victoria says I don't need much space because I'm just a kid. Marcus knelt down and picked up the photo. In it, David was smiling broadly, his arm around his daughter as she blew out candles on a birthday cake. They both looked happy and healthy. Where are all your things from before? Marcus asked. Your toys, your clothes. Victoria gave them away, Lily whispered. She said I didn't need so much stuff. Behind them, Victoria appeared in the doorway. I donated her old things to charity. It seemed wasteful to keep outgrown clothes and broken toys. Marcus stood up slowly, his jaw tight with rage. She's 7 years old, Victoria. She needs toys. She needs proper clothes. She needs a real bedroom. Victoria's mask finally slipped, and Marcus saw the cold calculation underneath. She needs to learn that the world doesn't owe her anything. David spoiled her terribly, filling her head with fairy tales and nonsense. I'm teaching her how real life works. By making her sleep in a closet. By teaching her that resources are earned, not given. She has a roof over her head and food to eat. That's more than many children have. Marcus looked at Lily, who was shrinking back against the wall like she expected to be hit. In that moment, he made a decision that would change both their lives. Lily, he said gently, pack whatever you want to keep in a bag. You're coming to stay with me. Victoria stepped forward aggressively. Excuse me, you have no right. I have every right, Marcus interrupted, his voice like steel. I'm her uncle, her blood relative, and I'm not leaving her in this situation for one more night. I am her legal guardian. Are you? Let's call the authorities and find out. Victoria's face went from pale to flushed. "You wouldn't dare. You'll humiliate yourself in court. People will say Marcus Thompson couldn't keep his wife, couldn't keep his house, couldn't keep his children. Can you live with that?" "I can live with their words," Marcus said, lifting the napkin and setting it down neatly as if signing something in silence. "What I cannot live with is the sound of my children crying." Lily had found a small backpack and was stuffing her few possessions into it. The framed photo, a small stuffed animal that had been hidden under her mattress, and now the books Marcus had brought. Victoria watched this with barely controlled fury. "Fine," she said finally. "Take her for the night. But she belongs here. This is her legal home, and I am her guardian. You can't keep her forever." Marcus lifted Lily's backpack and took her small hand in his. "We'll see about that." As they walked toward the door, Victoria called after them. "You don't know what you're doing, Marcus. That child is damaged goods. She's nothing but trouble and expense. You'll see, she'll make your life miserable, just like she made mine." Marcus turned back one last time. "The only thing making anyone's life miserable here is you, Victoria. And I promise you, this isn't over. Lily, I need to ask you some questions, and I want you to tell me the truth, okay? You're not in trouble, no matter what you tell me." The little girl nodded seriously, her brown eyes, David's eyes, fixed on his face with an intensity that was heartbreaking in someone so young. "Has Victoria ever hit you?" Lily's eyes darted away, and her small hands began to fidget with the hem of her dress. The body language screamed of a child who'd been trained to keep secrets, probably through threats and intimidation. "I'm not supposed to tell." She said bad things happen to little girls who tell lies about their mommies. "You can tell me," Marcus said softly. "I promise she won't hurt you for telling the truth." Lily was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could practically see her internal struggle, the need for help warring against months of conditioning and fear. Finally, she rolled up her sleeve to reveal finger-shaped bruises on her thin arm, marks that were clearly from an adult's grip. "Sometimes when I don't clean good enough, she grabs me really hard. And once she pushed me down the stairs when I broke a dish by accident." Marcus took photos with his phone, his hands shaking with rage that he carefully kept hidden from Lily. Each image was another nail in Victoria's coffin, evidence that would hopefully put her away forever and keep her from ever hurting another child. "What about food? How often does Victoria let you eat?" "I get breakfast sometimes, if I finish all my chores before she wakes up, and maybe dinner if there's leftovers from what she ordered. But Victoria says I eat too much and cost too much money, so mostly I just get crackers or bread when she's not looking." The systematic starvation explained Lily's gaunt appearance, but it also revealed something even more sinister. Victoria wasn't just neglecting Lily, she was deliberately breaking down the child's will to resist, using hunger as a weapon to ensure compliance. As Lily continued talking, Marcus documented everything on his phone, building a case that would destroy Victoria in court. The locked bedroom closet where Lily was forced to sleep, the constant verbal abuse, the complete isolation from other children her age, the way Victoria had thrown away all of Lily's belongings from her life with David. Each detail painted a picture of systematic psychological torture designed to erase Lily's sense of self-worth and belonging. "She tells me every day that Daddy never really loved me," Lily whispered, her voice breaking. "She says that's why he left me with her instead of making sure I had somewhere else to go." The cruelty of using David's death as a weapon against his own child made Marcus's vision blur with rage. "That's not true, sweetheart. Your daddy loved you more than anything in the world. I know we had our problems, but David never stopped talking about how proud he was of you." By the time Lily finished, Marcus had enough evidence to bury Victoria in court, but first, he needed to make sure Lily was safe and get professional help to document the abuse. His phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Marcus glanced at the screen, then at Lily, who was quietly finishing her cereal. "Marcus Thompson." "Mr. Thompson, this is Sandra Mills from Child Protective Services. We received a call yesterday about a child in your care." The woman's voice was professional but tired, the tone of someone who'd heard every excuse and seen every kind of family dysfunction imaginable. Marcus's blood ran cold, but he kept his voice steady. He'd expected this. Victoria would have called in favors, played the victim, tried to use the system to get Lily back under her control. "What kind of call?" "A woman named Victoria Thompson claims you kidnap her stepdaughter and is demanding immediate return of the child. She's filed a formal complaint alleging that you have no legal right to custody and are holding the child against her will." We need to conduct a welfare check." Marcus looked at Lily, who had gone very still at the mention of Victoria's name. Her small hands were gripping her spoon so tightly her knuckles were white, and the fear that had briefly left her face came flooding back. "Of course," Marcus said calmly. "When can you come by?" "I'm actually outside your building now, Mr. Thompson. This is considered an urgent case due to the kidnapping allegations." 20 minutes later, Sandra Mills sat in Marcus's living room, her expression growing darker as she reviewed the photos on his phone while Lily played quietly in the next room. Sandra was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the weary expression of someone who'd seen too much human cruelty, particularly toward children. She was thorough in her examination of the evidence, asking detailed questions about each photo, taking notes in a thick file that already contained Victoria's complaint. Marcus could see that Sandra had dealt with manipulative adults before. She wasn't taking anything at face value. "These bruises are consistent with grab marks from an adult hand," she said clinically, studying the photos of Lily's arms. "The pattern and spacing suggests someone with long fingers, likely a woman based on the proportions. And this bedroom situation." She shook her head in disgust. "It's completely inappropriate for a child. Has she seen a doctor recently?" "Not since before her father died 6 months ago, as far as I know." Victoria claimed she was homeschooling Lily, but when I asked Lily about lessons, she said they never did any actual schoolwork. Sandra made notes in her file, her pen moving rapidly across the page. "Educational neglect is another serious concern. I'll need to interview Lily privately, and we'll need medical documentation of her current condition. But based on what you've shown me, I don't see any reason she can't stay with you temporarily." "What about Victoria's legal claim? She keeps insisting she's Lily's guardian." Sandra's expression hardened, and Marcus could see the protective instincts that had probably drawn her to this difficult profession. "Legal guardianship can be challenged if we can prove abuse or neglect. And from what I've seen here, we have grounds for an emergency custody hearing. I'm also going to recommend that the district attorney's office take a look at this case." The next few days passed in a blur of legal meetings, doctor's appointments, and careful conversations with Lily. Marcus felt like he was learning to be a parent in real time, figuring out how to balance protecting her with helping her heal from months of trauma. Dr. Patricia Hayes, a pediatrician who specialized in abuse cases, conducted a thorough examination of Lily at UCLA Medical Center. The doctor was gentle but thorough, documenting every injury, every sign of malnutrition, every indication of the systematic abuse Lily had endured. "This child shows classic signs of chronic neglect and psychological abuse," Dr. Hayes told Marcus privately after the examination. "She's significantly underweight for her age, showing signs of chronic dehydration, and her psychological state is consistent with long-term emotional trauma. The healing process is going to take time, patience, and professional help." Dr. Hayes also noted other disturbing details. Lily's hands were calloused from constant cleaning. Her posture was that of a child who'd learned to make herself invisible, and she flinched at sudden movements even when she knew she was safe. The physical evidence painted a picture of systematic abuse that went far beyond occasional punishment. Meanwhile, Marcus's private investigator, Jake Morrison, had been busy digging into Victoria's background. Jake was a former lab detective who specialized in complex family cases, and what he'd discovered about Victoria was more explosive than Marcus had dared hope for. "Your sister-in-law isn't who she claims to be," Jake told Marcus during a meeting at his downtown office. The walls were covered with certificates and commendations from Jake's police career, but his expression was grim as he spread files across his desk. "Her real name is Victoria Caldwell. She's been married 3 times before David, and all 3 husbands died under suspicious circumstances that were never properly investigated." Marcus felt sick as Jake laid out the evidence. 3 men, all wealthy, all relatively young and healthy, all dead within 2 years of marrying Victoria. Each death had been attributed to natural causes or accidents, but the pattern was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. "Are you saying she murdered them?" "I'm saying it's a hell of a coincidence that would make any competent detective take a closer look," Jake replied, pulling out death certificates and insurance policies. The first husband, Robert Caldwell, died of a heart attack at age 34. No history of heart problems, excellent physical condition. The second, James Peterson, died in a car accident, brake failure on a vehicle that had just passed inspection. The third, William Hayes, overdosed on medication that wasn't prescribed to him. Jesus Christ. Marcus stared at the files, feeling like he was looking into the abyss of human evil. Each time, Victoria inherited everything. Each time, she moved to a new state and took on her dead husband's name. She's essentially been running a Black Widow operation for 15 years, targeting wealthy men who were vulnerable after losing their first wives. The methodology was chilling in its calculation. Victoria specifically sought out widowers with children, presenting herself as a nurturing stepmother while systematically isolating and abusing the children to ensure they wouldn't interfere with her plans. Marcus stared at the files Jake had spread across the desk, each one representing a life cut short by greed and calculation. What about David? I'm still working on that, but I did find something interesting. Jake pulled out a bank statement with several highlighted transactions. 3 days before David died, Victoria took out a life insurance policy on him for $2 million. She also had him sign some papers, told him they were updating their beneficiary information for their joint accounts. But Harold said David never completed his will. Right. But what Victoria didn't know is that David had already set up a trust for Lily years ago, before he even met Victoria. It was established when Sarah died, and it's worth about $50 million, the bulk of his estate. Marcus's heart began to race. This changed everything. If Lily had her own trust, independent of David's estate, then Victoria had no claim to it whatsoever. Where is this trust? That's the thing. It's been hidden. The documents are with a different lawyer, one David used for his more private business dealings. Victoria doesn't know it exists, and neither did Harold Kendrick. David compartmentalized his legal affairs to keep certain information private. Jake handed Marcus a business card for Thomas Brennan, estate attorney. Call him. He's been managing Lily's trust for 3 years, waiting for her to either turn 18 or for something to happen to David that would trigger the custody provisions. The revelation that Lily was not only safe from Victoria's financial manipulation, but was actually one of the wealthiest children in California felt like a miracle. But Marcus knew that money alone wouldn't heal the trauma Victoria had inflicted. That afternoon, Marcus sat in the plush office of Thomas Brennan, estate attorney, feeling like Alice falling down the rabbit hole. The office was old-school elegant, with leather-bound law books and oil paintings of stern-looking judges, but Thomas himself was surprisingly young and energetic. Your brother was very specific about his wishes, Thomas explained, reviewing a thick file that contained documents Marcus had never known existed. The trust was to remain secret until Lily turned 18, unless David died before then. In that case, custody of Lily and control of the trust was to go to you, Marcus, as her closest blood relative and the person David trusted most. But Victoria married David after this trust was set up. Doesn't that change things? Thomas shook his head firmly. The trust is irrevocable and was created with very specific language to prevent exactly this situation. David had seen too many cases where children lost their inheritance to stepparents, so he made sure Lily's trust was completely protected. Victoria has no claim to it whatsoever. Marcus felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. So Lily is actually one of the richest children in California, Thomas confirmed. The trust includes your brother's share of several tech companies he invested in early, real estate properties in Beverly Hills and Malibu, and substantial stock portfolios. At current valuations, she's worth approximately $68 million. The irony was staggering. Victoria had married David and murdered him for what she thought was his entire estate, the house, his personal savings, his life insurance. But the real wealth, the fortune that could have set her up for life, had been beyond her reach all along. Does Victoria know? Not unless David told her, which seems unlikely given the circumstances and his instructions for secrecy. She probably thinks she got everything when she inherited the house and his personal assets through the marriage. That evening, Marcus sat Lily down for a serious conversation. She was wearing new clothes he'd bought her, a pretty blue dress that actually fit, along with new shoes and a warm sweater. She'd gained several pounds in just a week of regular meals and was starting to look like a normal 7-year-old again. Lily, there's something important I need to tell you about your daddy. The little girl looked up from her book. She'd been reading constantly since he'd given her access to his library, as if trying to make up for lost time. Before your daddy died, he made sure you would always be taken care of. Do you know what a trust fund is? Lily shook her head, her eyes wide with curiosity. It's like a special savings account that parents set up for their children. Your daddy put a lot of money in an account for you, and he asked me to take care of both you and the money until you grow up. How much money? Lily asked with 7-year-old directness. Marcus smiled, remembering how David had always appreciated honesty over sugarcoating. Enough that you'll never have to worry about anything ever again. And enough that we can make sure Victoria can never hurt you. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following week, but Victoria's lawyer struck first with a surprise move. Richard Stone, known for his ruthless tactics in high-profile family court cases, filed an emergency motion claiming that Marcus was mentally unstable and unfit to care for a child. The motion included fabricated evidence, anonymous testimony claiming Marcus was an unstable workaholic who'd never shown interest in children, medical records that had been taken out of context from a stress-related hospital visit years ago, and character witnesses who painted him as cold and unfit for parenthood. "My client is the child's legal guardian," Richard Stone stated during the emergency hearing. "Mr. Thompson has no right to keep the child, and Ms. Thompson is prepared to involve law enforcement if necessary." But Harold Kendrick, Marcus's attorney, was ready with a devastating response. "Your Honor, we have extensive evidence of systematic child abuse, and we also have some disturbing questions about the circumstances of David Thompson's death." The judge, Patricia Coleman, had been presiding over family court for 20 years and had seen every kind of manipulation and abuse imaginable. She was not easily fooled by expensive lawyers or theatrical performances. "That's a serious accusation, counselor. I hope you have evidence to back it up." The custody hearing became a battle between two very different visions of reality. Victoria arrived at the courthouse in a black dress, playing the grieving widow perfectly. She'd even brought a folder of what she claimed were Lily's school records and medical reports, all forged to make her abuse look like appropriate discipline. But Marcus had the truth on his side, and the truth had a way of cutting through even the most skillful lies. Judge Coleman presided over the hearing with stern efficiency, her expression growing darker as each piece of evidence was presented. "This is an emergency custody hearing for Lily Thompson, age 7, she announced. "The child's stepmother, Victoria Thompson, is requesting immediate return of custody from the child's uncle, Marcus Thompson." Victoria's lawyer stood first, his expensive suit and confident manner designed to impress the court. "Your Honor, my client has been caring for her stepdaughter for 6 months since the tragic death of her husband. Mr. Thompson has unlawfully removed the child from her home and is refusing to return her, despite having no legal standing as a guardian." Harold Kendrick rose to respond, his voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "Your Honor, we have extensive evidence of child abuse and neglect. We also have evidence suggesting that Ms. Thompson may have obtained her current legal status through fraud and possibly murder." Judge Coleman's eyebrows rose. "That's a serious accusation, counselor." "Yes, Your Honor. If I may present our evidence." For the next 2 hours, Harold systematically destroyed Victoria's case. He presented Dr. Hayes' medical report documenting Lily's malnutrition and injuries, complete with photographs that made several people in the courtroom gasp in horror. He showed photos of the closet where Lily had been forced to sleep, the bloody scrub brush she'd been forced to use, and recordings Marcus had made of Victoria's verbal abuse. But the biggest bombshell came when Jake Morrison took the witness stand, his police credentials lending weight to every word he spoke. "I've been investigating Victoria Thompson's background," Jake testified, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades dealing with criminals. "What I've discovered is that she has a pattern of marrying wealthy men who die under suspicious circumstances." Victoria's lawyer jumped up. "Objection. This is character assassination with no relevance to the custody matter." Judge Coleman considered this carefully. "I'll allow it, but keep it relevant to the custody issue, counselor." Jake continued methodically. "Victoria Caldwell, also known as Victoria Peterson, also known as Victoria Hayes, has been married 4 times. 3 of her previous husbands died unexpectedly, and in each case, she inherited their entire estates before moving to a new location and taking on a new identity." The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. Victoria sat stone-faced, but Marcus could see, her hand shaking as she gripped the edge of the defendant's table. "Furthermore," Jake said, producing documents from his briefcase, "I have evidence that Victoria took out a substantial life insurance policy on David Thompson just days before his death, apparently without his knowledge or consent." Judge Coleman called for order, banging her gavel to silence the murmurs. "Do you have proof of this insurance policy, Detective Morrison?" Jake handed over documents to the court clerk. $2 million, Your Honor. The beneficiary signature appears to have been forged. We have handwriting analysis comparing it to David Thompson's known signatures. The evidence was damning, but the final blow came from an unexpected source. Dr. Martin Webb, the medical examiner who'd handled David's case, had been re-examining the original autopsy results based on Jake's investigation. "Your Honor," Dr. Webb testified, "based on new evidence brought to my attention, I ordered additional toxicology tests on tissue samples we'd preserved from Mr. Thompson's autopsy. What we found was traces of digitalis, a heart medication that can cause cardiac arrest when administered in large doses." Victoria's face went white, and her lawyer began frantically whispering in her ear. Mr. Thompson had no prescription for digitalis, nor any medical condition that would require it. Someone was slowly poisoning him over a period of several weeks, timing the final dose to coincide with the life insurance policy taking effect. The final witness was Lily herself. Judge Coleman had initially been reluctant to put such a young child on the stand, but Harold argued it was necessary for her to tell her own story in her own words. Lily walked to the witness stand in a pretty new dress Marcus had bought her, her hair clean and shining, looking healthier than she had in months. But when she saw Victoria glaring at her from across the courtroom, she began to tremble. "It's okay, sweetheart," Judge Coleman said gently, her stern judicial demeanor softening as she addressed the child. "Just tell us the truth about what happened at home with Victoria." In a small but clear voice that grew stronger as she spoke, Lily described her daily life under Victoria's control. The long hours of cleaning with her bare hands until they bled, the locked bedroom closet where she was forced to sleep, the constant verbal abuse, the frequent physical punishments for minor infractions. "She said Daddy left me nothing," Lily testified, her voice steady despite her tears. "She said I was worthless and that nobody would ever want me. But Uncle Marcus wants me. He reads to me and makes sure I have food and he never hits me." "How do you feel living with your Uncle Marcus?" Harold asked gently. Lily's face brightened, and for the first time since taking the stand, she smiled. "Safe. And loved. And he reads to me every night, just like Daddy used to." When Victoria's lawyer tried to cross-examine Lily, the little girl began to cry, clearly terrified of saying anything that might anger her former guardian. Judge Coleman intervened. "That's enough. The child has been through enough trauma." In her closing arguments, Judge Coleman addressed Victoria directly. "Ms. Thompson, what I've heard in this courtroom today is deeply disturbing. The evidence presented suggests a pattern of systematic abuse, neglect, and possible fraud." Victoria stood, her facade finally cracking. "Your Honor, I love David. I took care of his daughter the best I could. These accusations are—" "Sit down," Judge Coleman commanded. "You'll have your chance to defend yourself in criminal court, because I'm referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into possible murder, fraud, and child abuse." The courtroom gasped. Victoria's face went white. "As for custody," Judge Coleman continued, "I'm granting full legal guardianship to Marcus Thompson, effective immediately. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order preventing Victoria Thompson from having any contact with the child." Victoria leaped to her feet, screaming, "You can't do this. She's nothing. She's worthless. I'm the one who deserves that money." Her lawyer tried to quiet her, but Victoria was beyond control. "I worked so hard. I married that pathetic man. I put up with his sniveling daughter. I earned every penny." Judge Coleman banged her gavel. "Bailiff, remove Ms. Thompson from my courtroom." As Victoria was led away in handcuffs, still screaming about money and rights, Marcus felt Lily's small hand slip into his. The little girl was watching with wide eyes as the woman who terrorized her for months was finally facing consequences. "Is she going to jail?" Lily whispered. "Yes, sweetheart," Marcus said. "She's going to jail for a very long time." 3 months later, the criminal trial began. The evidence against Victoria was overwhelming. The forensic accountant had traced a pattern of financial fraud going back 15 years. The medical examiner had exhumed David's body and found traces of digitalis, a heart medication that could cause cardiac arrest in large doses. Victoria had been slowly poisoning David for weeks before his death, timing it perfectly to coincide with the life insurance policy taking effect. Her previous husband's bodies were exhumed as well. Each one showed signs of foul play. That had been missed during the original investigations. The prosecution painted a picture of a calculating serial killer who used marriage as a weapon, targeting wealthy, lonely men and systematically murdering them for their money. Victoria's defense attorney tried to paint her as a victim of circumstances, a woman driven to desperate acts by poverty and abuse. But the jury wasn't buying it. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Victoria was convicted on 4 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of fraud, child abuse, and conspiracy to commit murder, Judge Harrison, presiding over the criminal trial, showed no mercy. Victoria Caldwell, you are a predator who destroyed families and murdered innocent people for financial gain. You showed particular cruelty in your treatment of a defenseless child. I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Victoria was led away to spend the rest of her life behind bars, she turned one last time to glare at Marcus and Lily, who were sitting in the front row. Her eyes were full of pure hatred. But Lily wasn't the scared, broken child she'd been a year ago. She looked Victoria straight in the eye and said clearly, "Goodbye, Victoria." The woman who had tried to destroy her was finally gone forever. 2 years later, Marcus and Lily stood in the backyard of their new house, a beautiful family home in Malibu with a large yard, a swimming pool, and most importantly, a huge library where Lily could read to her heart's content. Lily, now 9 years old, had blossomed into a confident, happy child. She was thriving in school, taking piano lessons, and had made several close friends. She still saw a therapist once a week to work through the trauma, but she rarely had nightmares anymore. The inheritance trap had been sprung, justice had been served, and most importantly, a family had been saved.